We always talk to people off the record.
Yeah.
That's a crucial step to discovering these things.
Emmy and BAFTA-winning filmmaker Norma Percy's documentary The Road to 7th October, now on iPlayer, explores the key events of the past 20 years leading up to Hamas's attack. Through interviews with top US officials, a former Israeli Prime Minister, and the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed a month after speaking in the film, it reveals what really happened behind closed doors during peace negotiations and why they failed. Well, Norma Percy and the film's director Tim Stirzaker joins me now. Norma, Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Norma, this is your third documentary about the Middle East, and your first one was in 1998. How does this one differ from the other two?
It's different times. It's definitely different times. There was hope. It was right after Oslo. Then there was really hope for some two-state solution, some peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Then. So I made two series on the conflict. The last one ended 20 years ago. And after the terrible events of the 7th of October, the BBC asked us to go back and, well, look for the milestones along the way to the 7th of October that we all missed in the time. But it wasn't easy.
Sure.
We were talking to people who'd went through these terrible traumatic events and trying to ask them to try and think themselves back without hindsight at a time when they were negotiating peace and there really was hope for a two-state solution to become reality. It wasn't easy to get people to look back reflectively and tell stories this time.
I mean, the chat. I mean, when you began making this, Tim, you must have thought this is just going to be a catalogue of anger and despair and lost hope. Would you say that's where you ended up?
I hope not. There's a lot of anger in there, there's a lot of despair, and there's certainly a lot of lost hope in there. But I think the difficulty is that that can all just turn into chaos in a film, and it can turn into just a lot of noise. And the difficulty we face with these films is trying to plot you through a story, take you on a journey with this and actually make the moments when that anger is felt the most, where that loss is felt the most, actually turn those into events and stories. And what Norma's been doing with all her series over these years, and what I've done with her in recent series, is that the way you do that is to, rather than ask people the big questions about how they, what is going on, to really focus on specifics and specific events and meetings. I mean, when you were introducing it, you said inside the room, and that's really what these films are about. We only interview the top people who are actually there. So the prime ministers, the presidents, foreign secretaries, those sorts of, that level of people who can really take you inside those moments when negotiations were happening and how decisions were made. Sorry, Norma.
But not just the top people, because they're the sort of second-rank people who sometimes can give you insights. They just have to be there. For example, there's one meeting that we really are proud of getting, which really was the moment with Hillary Clinton's negotiations for Obama, when, I suppose the Palestinians lost hope that they could get somewhere. And the person who made it into a story was a second-rank person. He was Obama's Middle East person, but he was there taking notes, which also helps you remember. And he describes the moment when President Abbas asks a question. They really began a negotiation, and the Palestinians made a concession. They would allow the Israelis to have a hand in security when a Palestinian state was established for a year or so as a transition. And he turns to Netanyahu and asks him, how long would the transition be? And Netanyahu says, decades, many decades. And this number 2 rank official, Jeff Feltman, who describes looking at President Abbas and seeing his body language, looking at his face, seeing the sort of his face fall, and he just knew that that's when the Palestinians thought they would never get peace.
Yeah, when the spectrum of possibilities just narrows so greatly. Some of those people who you spoke to, I mean, Abbas is a good example, but Netanyahu as well. They've been fixtures like the whole time you've been looking at this part of the world, throughout your documentaries. Do you find them to be individuals who change dramatically over that period of time, or are they like horrifyingly consistent?
Well, horrifyingly consistent, pleasantly consistent. People don't change; they just become more so. But it's the horrifying thing is the process and how it somehow gets to a certain point, and something happens that it doesn't work.
Do you, in terms of picking the key points you're going to ask people about, the events along the way that are, I mean, as you said, you want to ask questions that are as detailed as possible. What's your process for figuring out what they are? Are they just a simple question of a timeline, or do those key events emerge through interview?
We always talk to people off the record.
Yeah.
That's a crucial step to discovering these things. I mean, we knew that the Obama administration got a 10-month settlement freeze from the Israelis, which gave them a small window to negotiate, and they had to do it within this window. But we didn't know, at what point was the significant one. So it always takes a while to find which these turning points are.
A good example, Mike, is that we knew that we wanted to begin the series with Ariel Sharon's withdrawal from Gaza. So that was our starting point. It was where Norma's last series finished. It's also a point where really you can sort of trace back. This series, as much of it is about how Hamas has grown in power over that period, and this was an interesting starting point there. But what we didn't know is how you get into that story, because it's a huge bombshell for many people. This is, the Israeli Prime Minister announcing, to the surprise of most of the world, that unilaterally, without any negotiation with the Palestinians, he was going to pull Israeli forces and settlements out of Gaza.
And literally, they were dragging settlers out. I remember, yeah.
And so one of those things is we knew that was the story, but you're always looking for that moment, that scene, that you can tell it in a way that will work in a documentary like this. And actually what we found was there was a particular moment when Ariel Sharon's chief of staff, Dov Weissglass, told the Americans, and for them they describe it as this bombshell moment. They describe this shock at hearing the language that one of the Americans says he used was that Israel would just throw the keys over the fence, and that there's this total shock that he would do something like that. And we interviewed Condoleezza Rice, and she remembered this moment very specifically. And when you have somebody like Condoleezza Rice just remembering, oh yeah, Weissglass came into my office and I remember him sitting down and he laid this out for us. Suddenly, actually, what is then quite a complicated idea just becomes a story. You're in the room with them. And so we're always looking for those moments where the politics discussion can be described in a way that's a conversation between the people that we're interviewing.
The access you get is, of course, astonishing, as it always is. But I mean, among the people you interviewed, I mentioned earlier, you spoke to Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader who was, I guess, not long afterwards, presumably, was assassinated in Tehran. How did you persuade him to speak to you? Were there concerns that because you were coming under a BBC flag, that some people might have had preconceptions about how you're going to approach the subject, on one side or the other?
We persuaded Hamas in the same way we persuade everybody. We try to make a genuinely multi-sided approach, which means that we ask everyone the same question. What was the important meeting? What did you say? What did they say back to you? And the fact that everybody is allowed to tell their story and we create a meeting by putting their various accounts together. So, we persuaded Hamas in the same way we persuade anyone. We make our pitch. We show them our past programs to show that we really do what they say, and they can take part or not. In this case, they agreed, and they gave us the same sort of off the record previous discussions, so we know what they considered important as well. But it was no different than doing anything else.
Sure. I mean, Tim, you'll be aware that there was another BBC documentary about Gaza recently taken down because it was narrated by the 14-year-old son of a Hamas government figure. When you're pursuing a documentary like this, I mean, that kind of thing is obviously a sort of director's nightmare, less of a risk with a programme like yours. But that business of what some people want is balance, what other people want is truth, and that's not necessarily going to be the same thing. How do you approach that?
Well, as Norma was saying, the thing about these series, which is at the very heart of them all the time, is that they are multi-sided accounts of historical events. And we have the advantage, not least because of Norma's incredible reputation, which does kind of mean that people take us very seriously from the start. We have the advantage that we can normally say, look, we're interviewing the Secretary of State from this place, and we're interviewing the President from another country. And what that means is that we just try to present all the major players in any situation. So, in this, that is the Israelis, the Palestinians, Hamas, and the Americans. They're the kind of main parties in this. And we give, as Norma says, we approach all of the interviews in a very similar way. We put them out there, and we sort of trust the audience, I think, to be able to watch those and take something from that and follow the story as they see fit.
You, among others, you interview the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who shows you the map of Israel, Palestine. He presented in 2008, which would have seen large Israeli territorial concessions. It's a peace plan that was eventually rejected by the Palestinians. Why do you think he showed you that now?
It's a really good question. I mean, we weren't sure at all that we were going to get him to show us that map. We met him first of all, as in the normal way that we do with everyone off the record, a couple of months probably before we filmed the interview. And Olmert's someone who he's an amazing interview. He's this great kind of gregarious man. He's very good at describing details, but he has told his story quite often, and so we wanted to try and get something different and something a bit new out of it. So when he was telling us the story, he went through it and described this map and explained very clearly why he had never shown it to anybody. That the minute something like that is out in public, it becomes, rather than a real detailed conversation that you can have privately, it becomes part of a big public debate, and it's just much, much more difficult to make real progress. So he has very deliberately and very explicitly said that he has never shown the map to anyone. And then he sort of said, just as we were finishing, and he said, I've never shown the map to anyone, but I've still got a copy at home. And that we sort of parked it there. And then a couple of months later, when we went to film it, we filmed the interview in his house, in his apartment in Tel Aviv. And we just thought, well, he's got it here. It's worth an ask. And so we were just setting up, and I asked him, what do you think? Do you think you could share it with us? And it was last summer, June 24. The war was just grinding on and on. Still, hostages were still in Gaza. It was just a really terrible situation. There were protests every day in Tel Aviv. And I think for him, it just, that moment of hope that came with the map that you see in the film, that you really actually believe, albeit there are huge problems around it. Olmert himself, when he presented the map, was under investigation for corruption, and it's very difficult. But he, in that moment, thought, it's this summer, there looks like there is no hope for peace. This is the right moment to share it. And it was really interesting. All the Israeli crew that we were using were fascinated by it. Not so much because of what was in it. I think there are lots of details in that map that have been discussed elsewhere, but it's real and it's concrete, and it feels like something that could actually be held onto. And I mean, even now, but especially last summer, that felt so far from where things were.
Yeah, I mean, it may even feel further now, I'm not sure. When speaking to US officials that you speak to, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Condoleezza Rice, people like that, Is there a sort of overriding, how to put it, an overriding mood you get from them? Is it one of regret? Is it one of a sense that they may have been naive in the past, that their optimism was too great? Is it anger? What did you get from them?
Well, John Kerry says you have to be caught trying. And it is. We filmed John Kerry the morning after he knew that Trump had won. And I think he was in a particularly reflective mood. And when he took over, Hillary was the first Secretary of State for Obama, and she had her good try and failed, and he was second term. And by which time poor Obama was rather frustrated with dealing with both sides, and Kerry had another go, and he came quite close, but I don't. It was one of those moments when you feel people are really looking back in their memory and seeing how they felt, and that's what he said. Well, you got to get caught trying, and that was the end of serious peacemaking.
I mean, and because in the last, I was going to say 6 months, maybe less than that, the last month, so much has happened so quickly. If you were making this documentary again, or at least making another one, 20 years from now, sipping a cocktail on Trump's Gazan Riviera, I mean, do you think we are currently now in an atmosphere of just unreality that is different from even the ambitions for peace in the past? Or is that kind of what people have always thought?
Oh, there's always ups and downs. I mean, my first series was commissioned in the light of the optimism of Oslo. And by the time we started work, Rabin was shot, and Netanyahu came in for the first time. And these cycles come and go, but I think it's about time for an optimistic cycle to appear. I'm not quite sure where it comes.
I think we're overdue that. Look, just to move away from Gaza for just a second, the first series you made after you left Grenada was the Second Russian Revolution, I think, about the fall of the USSR. And you made another one about Russia where you got Gorbachev on camera. You've also interviewed Vladimir Putin as well. Looking at everything that's been happening over the last week, you must just be itching to sit down with them in a room and find out what they think about what's been going on in other rooms and all that.
Oh, absolutely itching. But these programs really are best when they've come to a climax. My first series was End of Empire, and each program ended when the flag came down and the terrorists became police chiefs, and that's the time to look back and reminisce. So we would absolutely love to go back to the Russia when the Ukraine war was over and do the peace conference. We would absolutely love to go back to the Arab-Israeli conflict when the ceasefire is held and we have normalized relations between Israel and the Arabs. We're just waiting for the world to do it for us. We have our selfish reasons as well as the same reason that everybody else does.
Do you think you could get Vladimir Putin in a room again?
We don't predict.
Well,
I would certainly love to.
Yeah, no, I can. I mean, I can't. I mean, you've had such a remarkable roll call of leaders. Bill Clinton, Gorbachev, we mentioned, Slobodan Milosevic, Tony Blair, and so on. Do you find them? And I guess this is probably my last question. But do you find them to be essentially similar people? Is there a commonality between them? You think they're that kind of person, they're that leader kind of person, and they're different from other people?
No, I think they probably have a thicker skin than most of us because they have to suffer the slings and arrows more than the rest of us do. But I think they're people like any others. I mean, Hillary Clinton is the one precious in my mind. She was been the hardest person to get over the last decades, and we were very pleased that she gave us an interview, and such a good interview. And I expected her to be well briefed and but possibly a bit careful, but she was really good when we explained to her that storytelling is what it's about. And she would look back into her memory of these meetings. I mean, there was one in the episode that goes out tonight, which she got so angry at Netanyahu. Vice President Biden was visiting Jerusalem, and he took that moment to announce some more settlements built in East Jerusalem. And you could just feel her feeling the anger at the time. It was a slap in the face to Biden, to Obama, to me, to the whole administration. And when you can witness those moments, well, I mean, there's a sort of feeling in the pit of your stomach, isn't there?
You know when you've got it. You know when it's happening on the camera.
Totally.
And it makes the boring bits worthwhile.
I'm not sure I believe there are boring bits. But look, Norma, Percy, Tim Stirzaker, thank you very much indeed. And The Road to 7th October is now on iPlayer.
Thanks, Hugo.
Thank you.